Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, February 25th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 189 days, the game against Michigan in 273 days. We're going to be talking recruiting today, but unlike a couple shows recently where we're talking about recruiting in the future, today we're going to be taking a little bit of a backwards look at recruiting and some of the most interesting stories that came out of the 2023 recruiting class for Ohio State, both involving guys that they did get and guys that they didn't. That is one of the most popular features of the year that we run on our site at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And Alex Gleitman is the one who writes it every single year. And Alex, this time we're looking at the defensive line, and there are some real interesting stories there. We're going to take a look at defensive end and defensive tackle, each of those kind of position groups, one guy they got and one guy they didn't. And we're going to start at defensive end, and there's really only one choice here because, well, there's only one choice here. They only signed one defensive end, Joshua Mickens. What was the story behind his recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, not a huge story. He was a kid they liked a lot. They evaluated. I think it was spring of 22 now, if I'm getting my years correct. I think he had been at Ohio State camp the year before entering his junior season. So he was a kid they were aware of. He's from Indianapolis, so not too far. It's usually a footprint. And I think they liked him a lot. They might have even had him for a visit last summer. I can't remember. They liked him a lot. I think it was just a kid that they wanted to continue to evaluate, see how he did his senior year. But he decided to kind of call it a day, and he committed to LSU. Brian Kelly had just come from Notre Dame, so obviously being an Indiana native was very familiar with him and got sold on going down to LSU, playing defensive end in the SEC. But I think, as the year went on, Ohio State continued to evaluate Joshua Mickens. One of the things Ohio State does really, really well is whether they have their own commits, whether someone's committed elsewhere or whether someone's uncommitted, they continue to evaluate kids till they sign their letters of intent to Ohio State or elsewhere. And it's not just even the guys that they do get committed from, it's not like, okay, we have a commitment and yep, we don't need to look at him anymore. They want to make sure that that's the kid that they think that they're getting. And other kids that maybe they didn't offer or they weren't sold on previously, maybe they changed their mind with a great senior season. I think that was kind of the case with Joshua Mickens. They liked him a lot, but they maybe needed to see a little bit more, and he had a really good senior year. They really, really started to like him, and unfortunately for Joshua, I mean, it worked out for both parties in the end, but unfortunately for him, he had a situation in his family where one of his family members passed away, and I think it just got him starting to think about staying closer to home. LSU, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, not that close to Indianapolis. Ohio State, what are we talking? 3-hour drive to not even to Columbus. And so I think as Ohio State started to really like Josh started thinking about staying closer to home. I mean, this just made perfect sense. Ohio State didn't have any defensive ends committed in their class. They were chasing a few. They thought they were going to get at least one of the three that they were chasing. And having Joshua Mickens, who visited for the Indiana game, came back a couple weeks later, took his official for the Michigan game. That ultimately sealed it. He signed in December, and that's when he announced. But, it just made too much sense for both parties, and not too crazy of a background story there, but just circumstances on both sides making a perfect match.
And then as far as the guys they didn't get, you mentioned they were chasing three very big-time defensive ends and ended up going 0 for 3, and that was one of the big stories of the cycle for Ohio State. Was you felt at times like they were maybe going to get at least two of those guys, and they ended up getting none of those guys. So that was, that was there was kind of different stories behind all three of those. Can you share, pick one and share one of them, and then folks can go to the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com to get the other two.
Yeah, I think that those three recruitments, as well as I talked about running back a little bit, and maybe one in cornerback that we'll probably talk about next week. I think that when you heard Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni talk about changing their approach for the upcoming recruiting cycle with NIL and things along those lines, I think that these three recruitments probably played a big role in that, because they, to some extent, they put all their eggs in the baskets of Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson, and Mateo Uagalele, and they came up empty-handed, and they had good reason to feel good about their chances of all, at least Wilson and Mateo at one point. It really looked like they were going to get both of them. I think they they felt like less of a chance with Keeley just because Alabama, was in a pretty good spot there. But they felt like they were at least going to get one of those three, if not two of those three, and they ended up getting none of the three. And I'll just talk about Uiagalelei, and that was a tough one to swallow because I think that they felt for at least since last summer, since like June, at a minimum, that they were in a really good spot there. And they had no reason to believe that that was changing heading into the week of signing day. But all of a sudden in December, you started to hear murmurs of USC, which, look, Lincoln Riley getting USC. I mean, if USC beats Utah in the Pac-12 championship, they're in the playoffs in Lincoln Riley's first year at the helm. And, for a local kid at St. John Bosco, an LA powerhouse school, when USC is rolling, it's hard to get kids from that school to not go to USC, right? But I think Ohio State still felt that they can hold off USC, but out of nowhere, the week of signing day, maybe a day or two before, you started to hear Oregon. And Oregon was always in this thing, but they were always kind of viewed as the third school. And somehow they jumped from 3 to 1 out of nowhere. You do the math, world of NIL we live in, a lot of Nike money. Look at other prospects across the country that Oregon has been able to pull in seemingly out of nowhere. So that's all I'll say on that. But I think everyone could do the math, and I think it taught Ohio State a lot of lessons that they can't go into this cycle kind of waiting on guys like that, where NIL could be a factor, where they're not a regional guy. I think they always have to have a backup plan, and they always have to be able to protect themselves so that they're not left at the altar, I guess, if you will.
And the other interesting piece of the Matayo Uiagalelei recruitment is that his brother DJ, who was, of course, the quarterback at Clemson the last few years, Matayo going up to Oregon, his brother DJ transferring to Oregon State. So they will get to face each other in the game that they used to call the Civil War, and they haven't come up with a new name, but they've decided you can't call it the Civil War anymore. So they will get to watch a brother versus brother thing potentially out in the state of Oregon at the end of the season this year. There are, in addition to the three guys we mentioned earlier, the three kind of top flight guys, there were 5 other people that Alex wrote about in terms of defensive ends who Ohio State was pursuing at various points that they didn't end up signing, and some really interesting stories there as well. So you're going to want to check that out. Moving inside, there are 3 guys. We actually have some choices here in terms of who you want to talk about in terms of the defensive tackles that they brought in this year. One is a legacy, the son of a former Ohio State All-American. One is from Chase Young's old school. One they pulled out of the Deep South. So which one you want to talk about, Will Smith Jr., Jason Moore, or Caden McDonald?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing is, there's not much to talk about with any of those guys. It was relatively drama-free. I mean, Will Smith Jr., the minute he got an offer, he was going to be an Ohio State Buckeye. I mean, that was a no-brainer. Caden McDonald was a little bit more interesting, I think. I guess I'll talk about him because Jason Moore, I think they were always in the game. They just hadn't gotten a visit, and they got him on campus, and he just fell in love with Ohio State. He loved Larry Johnson, who does really well in the DMV area, and Notre Dame thought they were going to get him, and Ohio State was just felt more at home for him. But Caden McDonald was a guy, I'd say, in fall of 2021. He was taught, if you spoke to Caden McDonald, I think he was offered around fall of 2021. He might have made a visit that season too, and he really liked Ohio State. He was really high on Ohio State. But from then until the fall of 2022, you barely heard Ohio State and Caden McDonald linked together. And it really looked like he was going to Clemson, and if not Clemson, maybe Oklahoma, where obviously Brent Venables was the defense coordinator at Clemson, now is the head coach at Oklahoma. But Larry Johnson just somehow kept the relationship going, kept in touch, was able to convince Caden to come back for a visit in the fall. And that really kind of, I think, was the turning point in this recruitment. Ohio State doesn't really have a player like Caden McDonald on their roster. They have a lot of these guys who you could probably argue are 3 techs that end up playing 1 tech for them. I think Caden McDonald's kind of a true 1 tech. He's different than a Will Smith. He's different than a Jason Moore, who I think is kind of, I like someone on the board put it as a rich man's Doug Worthington. I think they convinced him they needed help at defensive tackle. I think that there's an opportunity to potentially see the field as a freshman in that rotation. but if not, definitely in the years to come, there's plenty of playing time and the role he could play in the defense. So I think it was just the relationship with Larry Johnson, Ryan Day playing a really big part in coming into that one and showing him how much he wanted and the fit there. And even like coming down to like the last few weeks, some people thought, okay, it's not going to be Clemson, but it's going to be Oklahoma. And Ohio State was just able to pull, I think it was a Halloween surprise on that one.
All right, and there was, as you mentioned, a little less drama on the interior of the defensive line in this class as opposed to the ends. But there were 5 guys that you wrote about who they didn't end up signing. Which of those stories was maybe the most interesting to you in terms of the guy who didn't end up at Ohio State? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, I think you knew which one I was going to say. Because honestly, like a lot of people want to know about John Walker, and Derek LeBlanc was looking good early, and Brendan Vernon's from the state of Ohio, so like why didn't he sign? But and you could read all about those in the actual the piece for subscribers. But Darren Reed, to me, this was like the craziest, and like I've done this now for, I don't know, like 15, 16 years. And maybe this was like, I've never had a kid get on the phone with me, give me like quotes for a story before he makes his announcement, and then like decide for a different school without kind of like giving a heads up. So I literally probably spent 20, 30 minutes on the phone with the kid talking about why he was going to pick Ohio State and how much he loved Larry Johnson and the relationship with Ryan Day and the opportunity to play in Jim Knowles' defense, which excited him, and blah, 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 on and on and on. I wrote the whole article. I had it saved, ready to publish, and, you know, you kept hearing LSU, 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 and it was like, this kid is, I mean, I would like text him like, hey, is anything changing? Is anything changing? And, you know, I wasn't being told yes, and all of us, you know, Ohio State kind of got, I think, an indication it wasn't going to be them a little bit before the announcement. I put on the board like, hey guys, sorry to mislead you, but I think it is going to be LSU. I'll share the story after, and thus this is me sharing the story. I mean, it was really bizarre. Even afterwards, I kind of tried to contact the kid and say, why'd you do that to me? And he didn't really have an answer. He kind of, I don't know if he was embarrassed or whatnot. He was trying to, if you're going to play your cards close to the vest, that's fine. Just be like, hey, I'm not doing any interviews. That's all you have to do. But instead, he spent wasted his time on the phone with me talking about Ohio State. And look, if he was truly flip-flopping, it's very simple. Hey, sorry, Alex, I was flip-flopping. I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I wanted to help you out. I thought it was Ohio State at that point, but I decided it was LSU. Like, that never happened. So just so bizarre, such a bizarre situation. And the funny thing is, he didn't even end up signing with LSU. He ended up flipping to Auburn late in the game, Hugh Freeze, with a nice late flip. So I think he's going to be a tremendous player for Auburn. I really do. But I don't know, maybe dodge the bullet a little bit there. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, you want to know how the sausage is made? Well, this is how the sausage is made. And sometimes it's a little messy back in the kitchen covering recruiting. But these are the real stories. This is how it all goes. Alex, as I mentioned, has already done the full offense. He did the defensive line, and you heard him there. You heard him earlier. He's coming back on the show to talk about linebackers and defensive backs pretty soon. So, I mean, it will mean there's more of that great content coming just in the next week or so at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So you're going to want to sign up today to make sure you get all of that. Because again, we talked about 4 players here. He had, I think, 17 on just the defensive line alone. So you can imagine how much there is in terms of the offense and how much is still to come. All great content, really good, really good. So you want to know the real story, here's the real story stuff. So you can find that all at BuckeyeHuddle.com on the Huddle board. Alex does his weekly ADEC column. Mark does his weekly Skull Session column, both covering recruiting. They also do the Eyes on the Trail daily recruiting coverage feature that is all exclusive to members, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So you are going to want to sign up today to get access to all of that great stuff. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.